Hello and a very warm welcome to Moneycontrol's budget debate on the Indian economy. I am Shweta Punj. To our viewers tuning in from across the country, a very warm welcome. We encourage you to join in on this debate and ask your questions with the hashtag budget with MC. The Indian economy seems to be the brightest spot at this time. It was the toast of the season at the World Economic Forum. As governments across the world grapple with an impending recession, there is something that's brewing in the Indian economy. So, what should budget 2023-24 look like? What should the policy priorities be? What are the must do's and don'ts? Should the budget be spending more or should it be cautious? We have with us an eminent panel, and I'd like to pose this question to all my panelists today. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Ajit Ranade, joining us from the Govt Institute of Politics and Economics. Then we have Professor Rajeev Gowda, spokesperson of the Congress Party, Aditi Nayar, Chief Economist of ICRA, Samiran Chakraborty of the Citigroup, and Dr. Syed Zafar Islam, spokesperson of the BJP. So this conversation is going to be interesting because of course it's one day before the budget, and the fact that this is the budget, the final budget before the election. So let me begin by asking my first question to Dr. Ranade. Dr. Ranade, I want to begin with a reality check. Let's take stock. We've seen car sales are booming, hotels are running full capacity, airlines are running full capacity, Maruti doubled its profit. Yet we see that India's unemployment rate in December increased to a 16-month high. We've seen FPIs withdrawing money. So what's really happening in India? What's the backdrop in which this budget is going to be presented? If you could just break that down for us, please.
Well, Shweta, car sales are booming, but not all car sales. For example, Mercedes recorded a 41% growth during 2022. I believe Lamborghini has also hit a new record in India sales, but two-wheeler sales are not doing well. They are stagnant, if not declining. So this is not the full story. And the same thing goes for other consumption expenditures. So let me begin by saying that there are three broad macro contexts to this on the eve of the budget. Number one is what you said is a global situation where both the World Bank and IMF have said that the world is going to go into a recession, especially the developed economies. Now, this is on the backdrop of an endless war in Ukraine, which has caused its own consequences of high inflation, especially in both food and fuel prices. So that is the first macro context. The second macro context is what you referred is I call it the K-shaped recovery, that on the higher end, we have booming consumer expenditures, whether it's airline travel, tourism, luxury goods and cars. But we cannot deny that there's a much larger population, which is the bottom part of the K, which is struggling against inflation, against joblessness, and against unemployment. Against declining consumer expenditure or stagnant consumer expenditure. So this is the second big macro context that we don't need Oxfam report to tell us about the widening inequality. So second macro context is the K-shaped phenomenon, which I believe we are in the third year. And the third macro context we must remember is the fiscal situation. The presentation of the budget is a statement of expenditures and revenues, but we are already stretched. The fiscal limits are already stretched, and we don't have much room to expand fiscal spending to boost growth. In fact, in an inflationary situation, you can't spend your way out of an inflation, and you certainly can't go against the monetary policy, which is trying to tighten money supply. So having said these three macro contexts, I think the budget has to address all three. Number one, if we are going to be in a recessionary world environment, we have to become more resilient. So we have to find ways to, keep our export growth, keep remittances, or keep private flows coming in, and also boost to domestic growth. Second, on the K-shape, we need to find ways to increase social security, increase some relief in the form of social security otherwise to the people who have been suffering. Of course, the free food grain scheme, which has been extended to 42 months, is probably necessary, but we need to think about other ways. And the third one is about the fiscal situation. We have to find a way to remain within the fiscal limits, but perhaps reprioritize our spending. Try to remove the duplications and redundancies, try to reprioritize towards, I would say, what is called human capital formation, which is health and education, and try to reduce the subsidies, try to not at the same time have excess dependence on excise duties on petrol and diesel, which are actually ultimately hurting the poorer sections more than the richer sections.
Well, there is a that's a very tall agenda that's been presented for Nirmala Sitharaman. Samiran, I'd like you to weigh in here. Are you also the same school of thought that Dr. Ranade has presented here, that India is going through a K-shaped recovery and that the budget needs to specifically address the inequalities that have aggravated in the last 3 years?
Thanks, Shweta, for having me on the show. My sense is that at this moment, prioritizing on fiscal consolidation is extremely important. Uh, I think I have a slightly different view on the growth situation. I think there is a tussle between current data and narrative. The current data seems to suggest that growth is holding up pretty well. But one can always paint a narrative that global recession or lagged impact of domestic monetary tightening is going to slow down growth as the year progresses. My view would be that if that actually happens, then fiscal policy can always respond to that at that point of time. But just in the fear of a growth slowdown, to have a slightly more expansionary fiscal policy at this juncture might not be the right thing to do. We have seen in the past that uh, after the global financial crisis, arguably we uh, continued with an expansionary fiscal policy far too long, which resulted in the 2013 mini crisis. So, from that perspective, today, my sense is that whatever option the government has of fiscal consolidation, by the way, we are going to get a one off support this year in terms of the subsidies being much lower than last year. So we should utilize that space and go in for that fiscal consolidation. We have to keep in mind that the debt to GDP ratio is more than 80%. And that means that the interest we are paying on that debt is eating up almost 40% of our tax revenues. So, from that perspective, there is an urgent need for fiscal consolidation. In our calculation, even if the economy is growing at 11% nominal GDP, which is a pretty decent growth, still fiscal deficit has to be below 5% of GDP for the debt to GDP ratio to fall. So I would argue that there is no good year for fiscal consolidation. No one likes fiscal consolidation, but sometimes the bitter pill has to be taken, and this is probably a good year to take that bitter pill.
Right, spoken like a true economist, Samiran. A good year to take the bitter pill, just a year before the elections, and this is the year also of state elections. Let me quickly bring in Professor Gowda here. Professor Gowda, what are your thoughts? We know that there are two narratives running on the Indian economy. The most prominent one being that India is an island of optimism and good news. It was the shining star at the World Economic Forum as well. What's the Congress's view on what's the backdrop that, according to you, is there in which Nirmala ji is going to be presenting the budget? I think you're on mute. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I wish India were, we're in such a rosy situation as the captains of industry described in Davos. The fact of the matter is that we are in a very hard place. Ajit Ranade just talked about a K-shaped recovery. The K-shape basically means that some portions of the economy are doing fine, the well-off, and the rest of the country is really suffering. And this is essentially a situation where people are not, dropping out of the workforce. There are no jobs. People are, essentially, we've had a huge continuation of the food security program. If we were the world's fastest growing economy and everything was so hunky dory, why is three-fourths of our nation eligible for food grains for free? Those are all questions that we should be asking. Have we reduced the inflationary burden on families? The oil prices may have stabilized globally, but we're not passing, and we have not, during this government's regime of many years, ever really properly passed on the benefits of lower commodity prices to the common person. And GST has been imposed instead on additional products that are consumed by farmers as well as by poorer sections of society. So we've created a situation which is highly negative and what shall we say, regressive. And this really hurts the poor even more. And therefore, this creates the right atmosphere, of course, to distract them with other divisive slogans, and that's what the government, excels in doing. But if you start thinking about these three, four dimensions, and the fact that we, to try and get out of that, right? We have, historically, there would have been a buoyant global market that would have enabled us to export more. Instead, what we're seeing is that the current account deficit is worsening. For all the talk about banning TikTok and a few Chinese apps, our trade deficit with China has crossed $100 billion. So when you start looking at the rupee, has fallen to historic lows, and that has not translated into a huge export thrust either. So basically, the government is in a very, very awkward and difficult situation, and the people are hurting, especially the poor. Manufacturing has not picked up as expected, and certainly jobs are not being created. Inflation continues. Core inflation. Listen to the RBI governor. He says, "Well, food and fuel may have come down, but core inflation continues to be a real problem." So basically, life is much, much harder for the vast majority of the public. And there are many things that we still need to remedy. For example, the loss in education that school children across the
Sure.
country experience over a couple of years, healthcare, and preparation for future pandemics. So it's a very, very difficult situation that the finance minister finds himself in. And I just wish the optimistic scenario would have had some credence. It does not.
Okay, all right. Let me get in Aditi here. Aditi, let's quickly get in your analysis. Are you optimistic about the Indian economy, or your assessment is that this is probably one of the tougher budgets for the finance minister because it's being presented in a near normal scenario after nearly 3 years of the pandemic now. Plus, it's the big final full budget before the big elections.
Thank you, Shweta. Well, my personal view is budgets are always tough. It's always a difficult year to sort of balance all the priorities that the government has to deal with every single year between managing the fisc, pushing expenditure, and the expectations that people have on the tax front. Now, I want to start with my view on the economy itself. And I wouldn't, instead of using the word K-shaped, I will characterize this as an uneven recovery. And I'm choosing uneven over K-shaped because what I feel is that there are certain sectors that are doing very well. And therefore, everybody involved in that sector, whether they're, the relatively well off or the relatively less well off, are benefiting from that. And what we're seeing right now is that there is this post-pandemic prioritization of the services sector. So demand for services is very high. And this has also led to a revival of the service sector jobs, including at the bottom of the pyramid. And therefore, everyone associated with the services sector is relatively doing better off than what they were during the pandemic. And because people are choosing to consume services, there's sort of reduction in the consumption of goods instead, particularly some types of consumer durables. And that is leading to the kind of trends that we're seeing in industrial production, for example. So I would rather use the word uneven than K-shaped. I think that's possibly a slightly better representation of what's happening right now in the Indian economy. On the budget itself, I agree with what Samiran said. We should have a good cushion this year, in FY24 compared to FY23, coming in from lower subsidies, particularly on the fertilizer side. In FY23, we've had to deal with global prices being where they are, and the fertilizer subsidy amount has been extremely high. So if that normalizes to some extent in FY24, we certainly have a good cushion within the budget. And we're looking at a nominal GDP growth being closer to 10% next year. and a tax buoyancy of roughly one, slightly less than that. So what we feel is that the government should be able to boost capital expenditure by at least 1 lakh crore, benefiting from the lower subsidies. And we do think that they can attempt to bring the fiscal deficit down to about 5.8% of GDP, which is a reasonable amount of fiscal consolidation compared to the 6.4% of GDP that was budgeted for the current year. And I think that is something that should be a reasonable sort of balance between these competing priorities.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Aditi, for that. Let me now bring in Dr. Islam. Dr. Islam, lots of expectations from this budget. Uh, there is this whole sense in the middle class also that they haven't gotten much. This is, and considering the finance minister herself said that she is the middle class, and she explained saying that no new tax has been levied on the middle class, but there is an expectation that rates need to be adjusted according to inflation. You heard the economist saying that the this is probably a year as good as any to swallow the bitter pill and go on the path of fiscal consolidation. You heard Professor Dr. Ranade talk about the need to provide support to those at the bottom of the pyramid. So, how is the government going to be viewing all these different pulls and pressures of putting together this budget? Are we? Are, is it a possibility that the government could present a budget that is more, I would say, I wouldn't want to use the word populist, but something that responds to the demands of different constituents in the country?
First of all, thank you, Ms. Point, for having invited me here.
Our pleasure, sir.
I heard everyone, but I would like to start with a very simple sentence that if you just scan the global economy, you will find that while many of the large economies are grappling with their own issues, whether inflation, whether recession, and many other issues, joblessness, but India appears to be a brightest spot for everyone. There is a consensus among the global community, global investor, and among all the economies, and on the street, wherever you speak, there is a consensus that Indian economy is doing exceptionally well and will continue to do better as far as the large economies are concerned. Having said that, there are many advantages India has. There are some advantages, disadvantages also India has. But we are, as a government, trying to address the concern of everyone and also sternly dealing with the advantages as well. As far as the expectation is concerned on the budget, I'm sure that I've heard somebody was talking about the fiscal consolidation. That is always our approach, that consolidation is our priority, and always we have given a roadmap. This year also we think, I hope that there will be a roadmap for fiscal consolidation, and sub 5 level is something which we want to achieve at around 4.5 over a period of time. But this year, at least from 6.4% to GDP to at least I'm expecting it around 5.9 or 5.8% of GDP. We will be targeting in this budget, something which we think should be our approach as of the government, because this is everybody is expecting, all the analysts, all the economists, and even we have always felt that fiscal discipline is something which is must for us, and we must follow that as well. Having said that, if you see Indian economy in the current state, while I heard Professor Gowda, I'm sure that when he speaks as an economist or as a professor, he will speak a very different language. But when he has to give a political tadka, being the spokesperson of Congress, I'm sure that he will speak something which put us in the spot, or he will speak something which is actually incorrect, because they know that they had left five fragile India was among the five fragile economy in 2014 and 13, and today we are one of the strongest economy in the world and top 5 economy in the world. So there is something for them to evaluate whether what they did and what is being done by this government under the leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister. There is a focus. If you just see today's context, Indian economy, what is important for the government, that all these issues of jobs, job creation, momentum, the demographic dividend, all this will work better if there is a growth momentum and it continues even in future Today we have 7%, which is perhaps the fastest among the large economies. But this momentum should continue, and there should be a growth of around 7% or slightly lower, or around that, or maybe 6.5%. That should continue. For that, perhaps government will have to take initiative in the upcoming budget. And in my mind, primary focus would be the rural area for development. So rural development will be the focus area for government, because we feel that there is some level of little bit of Mr. Ranade was also discussed. That demand if two-wheeler has come off. If you just scan it, high frequency data, then you realize that if some demand is coming up in rural area, I'm sure the government will focus on rural development, and a lot of budgetary allocation made towards that. Also, the infrastructure is something which is a priority for the government. We have identified project. All the projects will not be undertaken by the government, and whatever we had made this statement announcement in the last two budgets of 5.5 lakh crore, then 7.5 lakh crore. And the run rate is also, which is suggesting 0.9% of GDP, something which we are spending currently. But I personally feel that this year will be historic budget as far as the capital expenditure, focus on capital expenditure is concerned, and large budgetary allocation will be made. Maybe I heard one analyst, economist, was saying about 1 lakh additional allocation will be there. But personally, I feel that given this year, it is a priority for us, because we want to maintain the growth momentum. We want a large contribution. Every penny which is being spent should contribute to the national GDP. So focus will be infrastructure, and at least another 2 lakh crore will be added to what had been announced last year. So maybe it's 9 lakh crore or 9.5 lakh crore, something which I think we the focus on infrastructure projects. Then also what Dr. Ranade was talking about, the bottom end of the pyramid is always our focus. We have always worked for two objectives: to strengthen all the budgetary decision, all the policy decision, all the reform measures which have been taken, all the structural reform which has been taken with this government, with only two objectives. One, to strengthen the nation, make India as a strong country. Second, to ensure that Indian community, Indian citizen living in India become strong and empowered. So anybody who needs support from the government, Indian government under the leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister has opened its coffer for them, and it is very evident from the fact that we have demonstrated during COVID, and we're still supporting the people who need support from the government, and we'll continue to handhold those people who have expectation from the government and need support from the and expectation from the budget, and we will definitely live up to their expectation. Away from that is the middle class, which is something which everybody is talking about. Yes, this is a large section of the country is now has become a middle class, and they have certain aspiration, they have certain expectation. Middle class does not mean only the salaried people. Middle class means the people who are employed as SME sector as well. We have done lots for them. We will continue to focus on that. I'm sure that the budget will definitely focus on the middle class as well and live up to their expectation. When people ask to do something about the middle class, they only refer at the tax cut and some relief in the tax. I think that if you just scan among the 7 crore people who file the return, only 1.5 crore people who actually is paying tax, and within that bracket, very small section who actually is paying tax, large amount of tax. But relief, maybe tax relief is one of the incentive which we can give to the middle class, but there are many other ways to give incentive to the middle class, like for instance, Ayushman Bharat scheme. This is not only being for the poor, for the lower end of the society.
Right. Right.
So we will focus on that as well.
Okay.
So that
Okay, thank you, Dr. Islam, for that very nuanced perspective on the focus areas. As Dr. Islam said, they're going to be focusing on infrastructure creation. They will be looking at the path of fiscal. The government will be looking at the path of fiscal consolidation. I just want to share some numbers here. Now, India's growth estimates for 2022-23 is estimated at 7%, which is slower than the 8.7% that was posted for the year 21-22. RBI has also said that we're going to close this year about 6.8%. Moneycontrol conducted a poll of about 20 economists, and they're expecting growth to slow down, which is obviously going to weigh down on our tax revenues, on our expenditure, so on and so forth. So I want to ask all my panelists here, what are the low-hanging fruits for the finance minister to look at? Because we are looking at a slowing growth scenario. We are looking at a global recession. Our current account deficit is only widening. So, what are the low-hanging fruits, according to you, that she could look at, which could continue to buffer the Indian economy? Dr. Ranade, let me begin with you.
Well, obviously, unemployment insurance we don't have. So the proxy for that is National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. I think we should have a significant allocation for that, recognizing that it's proxy for unemployment insurance. Secondly, remember, job creation doesn't happen with large corporates or governments or army or post office. It happens in small enterprises and tiny enterprises. So we must have a special push towards them. One specific measure is that apparently an estimated 10 lakh crores, 10 trillion rupees are outstanding payments to MSMEs. The government must find a way to make a big dent on that. There is a TREDS platform, TREDS platform for receivables, and it's like an exchange. But even large public sector companies have not come onto the exchange. The government must coerce that. Thirdly, when you talk about PLI, rather than incentivizing production, or rather top line, and we should incentivize job creation and value addition. So slightly tweak the incentives such that they go more towards employment. So a company should be rewarded on the basis of how many jobs it is creating and what is the value addition. It's great to export iPhones out of India, but if the value addition is not even 3 or 4%, we're importing large amount of equipment and then re-exporting. Rather than that, focus on value addition and focus on job creation. Finally, on one small thing, our current account deficit is very worrisome, but we spend $50 to $70 billion importing gold. Surely the government should push its demat gold, or what is called sovereign gold bonds, in a very aggressive way, keep them on tap, and get Mr. Amitabh Bachchan to be a brand ambassador rather than doing it for Kalyan Jewelers alone.
Okay, well, and I'm sure Mr. Bachchan will give a discount also to the government, so it won't be a very expensive proposition for them. Will you take this back, Dr. Islam, to the team that's working on the budget?
Because that saves on gold imports, Dr. Islam.
Well, Dr. Ranade is a very established face, and people do hear him very often, and I'm sure that his voice will be heard in the government as well.
Okay, all right. Samiran, according to you, any low-hanging fruits that the finance minister and her team could definitely look at this point?
So Shweta, three parts to it. One part is with respect to policy. The other part is with respect to populism, and the last part is with respect to pragmatism. So the three P's: P for policy, P for populism, P for pragmatism. So on policy side, I would agree with Dr. Ranade that the manufacturing push and the kind of capex that comes with it. This has been the theme of this government for the last 2 years. We should not be changing themes so frequently. So we should harp on that theme and push most of the policy on similar themes. On populism, Dr. Ranade mentioned urban Narega. I think another thing being discussed is that can we move from the concept of minimum wage to living wages? This would, across the board, increase the wage structure and take care of the K-shaped recovery that we have been discussing. And the most easy, but economists generally don't like it, is to increase the PM Kisan allocation from, let's say, whatever, 6,000 rupees to 9,000 rupees, some inflation indexation there. no economist will like the idea because cash subsidies are typically considered to be inefficient. But if you take a slightly broader view, even in FY23, the total rural spending of the government, properly counted, is close to 5% of GDP. That's a fantastic number. We generally only focus on Narega and PM Kisan and that kind of stuff. But if you expand it to irrigation, education, health, all sorts of projects that schemes that go for rural, that's actually close to 5% of GDP. So when I will be evaluating quote unquote populism, then it has to be done in the context of that 5% of GDP number, not just in the context of what is the additional spend on Narega, etc. And lastly, on pragmatism, I think the pragmatism suggests what Dr. Islam was suggesting, that increase the proportion of capex, uh, maintain the improvement in quality of expenditure that the government has been talking about. But there is one challenge there. The challenge is that the central government's capex is almost entirely concentrated in two sectors of roads and railways. We have to widen this base. And in my view, we have to introduce social housing and urban infra as two other prongs of capex through which the central government can spend the money. Otherwise, what central government almost out of desperation is doing is giving 1 lakh crore of loans to state governments for capex because the central government does not have the capacity to do that spending. I think that's not the ideal model because states were not prepared for this 1 lakh crore, and this year they have not spent the full capex budget at all. So these are the three things I would end with: one on policy side, one on populism side, and one on pragmatism.
Okay. Aditi, very quickly, your thoughts on the low hanging fruits for the government to tap into.
Thanks, Shweta. So I'll pick up from where Samiran left off. If we talk about this 1 lakh crore interest-free capex loan to the state governments, possibly the states were not prepared for the fact that the allocation was going to increase so sharply between FY21 and 22 and what they saw in the budget for FY23. So that might have been one of the reasons that the spending, the spending under the scheme has taken off very slowly. So yes, overall the capex amount, the allocation and the budget certainly needs to be improved. But I think also what needs to be done is to get the states to offtake and spend money under this capex loan scheme much faster than what they've done in FY23. So in FY23, the spending has been highly backended. If we can figure out the reasons for that, I have a few thoughts around why the spending was so low in H1. So if we can figure out and expedite the spending from the state side, then I think that might be a low-hanging fruit which can actually help to push up growth in H1 and help to counter some of the impending global slowdown and its impact on exports.
Okay. All right. Professor Gowda, any advice for Ms. Sitaraman?
Yeah, see, just to follow through on the points that were raised just now by all the economists. We're all economists here, by the way. The point is that rural infrastructure, right? So, Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana is legacy, to whatever extent that can be expanded. But along with that, where this whole idea of more granaries and storage facilities, more improvements on the healthcare and education facilities. A lot of these kinds of activities will allow more resources to flow in to rural India, which is really hurting. Similarly, urban India also could use much more infra, especially because a lot of urban growth is happening in a very unplanned manner. I was also going to bring up the matter of states. Now, today, states together spend more than the federal central government in terms of the overall fiscal expenditures in the country. And therefore, maybe we need to think about new initiatives that work together with states to ensure targeted projects. It could be not smart cities, but actual expansion of cities or creation of new cities, whatever, which would allow for, which would anticipate and respond to migration and growth pressures, things of that sort. So, and finally, actually, one of the biggest tragedies, in ongoing tragedies, is the number of youngsters who are not getting a quality education. And at the same time, we have these ed tech companies that are unicorns and decacorns. So, what can we do? Is there a possibility of some massive thrust to ensure that somehow we will get quality education to every child and every youth, going up to the college level in such a manner, a massive thrust that will overcome these years of neglect, perhaps, of slowdown, of lack of adequate skilling. All of these things literally make this a mission. This would be something that would enable us to go, to tap this young population and turn them into productive resources. So, and just finally, one last point here is to my friend Zafar Islam. Everyone likes to harp on that one term, fragile five. If you just look at the 5, 7, 8 years of Modi Sarkar, we left, the UPA coped with the global financial crisis. We revived the economy, and we left India on a high, and they benefited from it, the BJP and the country, for a couple of years. And then demonetization hit, and then GST, and we've been in a Modi slump ever since. And all this talk about the world is saying India is a happening place. Well, that's fine. Everyone else is not happening, but we we demand much more in this country, not just adulation from the rest of the world. You're letting our people down when you cannot give us, grow the economy at a level, even that low level that it was pre-pandemic. So basically, and this is an extraordinarily callous government that has been squeezing the poor, the middle classes, has refused to share the benefits of oil price falls, all these sorts of things. And so, basically, it's a very, very
So, Dr.
difficult.
Islam, is the government saving the revision of petrol and diesel prices for the election year? Will we see that revision happening?
No, they're too addicted to the revenues that come in from that, and basically, they'll keep increasing, and then after 25 increases, they will cut it down once and make a big hoopla about it. But they're very good at the PR side. That's it.
I can understand that why Professor Gowda had to resort to this kind of comment, despite being an economist. Understand when you have to wear two hats, sometimes you have to go off the track, and that's what he's doing here. Anyways, away from that,
Sorry, I'm not, but go ahead, continue.
Pose me a question. Let me first respond to that on petrol diesel prices. See, you have to understand, again, I'm requesting everyone to scan the global economy and how the situation is evolving. Energy is a big concern for the global community at this point in time. While the prices should have been at $70 and not $85. Why? Because the global demand is coming off, but China is another suddenly becoming a giant, and all the demand which is actually coming from China is steep, and they are working together with the oil producing countries to keep the level at very high level. And it is something as a cause of concern for everyone, particularly for India, and that's why the government is focused on that. Whenever it is the right time, definitely there will be relief. And it is something which everyone has to understand, because inflation is something which is also linked to that, and we have to contain the inflation, and government is focused on that. Today, all the emerging the large economies are struggling with the inflation. Global economy is having contraction, and which will grow at the rate of 1.7%. India is growing at 6-7%, and forecast is also very bright. And the contribution of India in global annual growth is still very, very high. So that is something which India has to focus on, which will come from rural infrastructure development, the focus on rural development, focus on
So I want to,
Subject.
I want to, I want to shift gears now to trade. India's current account deficit is expanding. It's a cause of great concern. We know that exports are going to slow down going forward, considering global demand is going to dry up. In the past, the government has increased import tariffs. The view has been that you increase tariffs and you make it more, you enable Indian businesses to manufacture here, but it might the move might be backfiring. I just want to get a sense from the economists here as well. Is there room to actually bring down the import tariffs so that Indian products become more competitive, enabling India to take advantage of the China plus one strategy, or should the government go protectionist? Let me start with you, Dr. Ranade.
Absolutely, absolutely. We walked out of RCEP abruptly, but the very next day onwards, we've been pursuing free trade agreement with everybody else, with the UK, with the EU, with Canada, with Australia, with UAE, and also with America. So obviously, I think that's just the message that we have to be much more open. And in the last few years, our tariffs have been going up, which is, I think, bad news. In fact, gold import duty is 15%. It's like a recipe for smuggling. So I think our import duties can come down. They should be moderate. I'm not saying they don't need to go to zero, but basically it's on average of 7 to 8% across the board. So we don't run into problems of inverted duties. And we are part of global value chains. As I said, we need to focus on value added, but we are still part of global value chains. So our export competitiveness will improve when we have a moderate tariffs rather than high. And we have PLI where we pick a few companies and give them subsidies of 2-3 lakh crores. On top of that, we give them protectionist advantage with higher tariffs. That doesn't work. That's not sound economic policy. I think we
Okay.
should be much more open, and that will actually promote India's competitiveness.
Okay, be more open. Aditi, your views very quickly. We're running out of time on this.
No, I agree with what Dr. Nanade has said. I think only one silver lining that I want to offer on the current account deficit is that if global demand indeed slows as much as we're afraid it might do, commodity prices will also come off, at least for some commodities that are not affected by supply chain issues coming out of Russia, Ukraine, for instance. And that may at least offset a part of the pain from lower exports and keep the current account deficit at roughly similar levels to what we're expecting for FY23. So I'll leave it at that and not repeat what Dr. Ranade said.
Okay, Samiran.
Uh, I hope things were as simple as what the textbooks would suggest. Unfortunately, we are living in a world where tariffs are used less as trade policy instruments, but more as industrial policy instruments. And that's being done across the board. So whatever Dr. Ranade has said makes absolute sense from a trade policy perspective. But once you bring in the industrial policy argument, then things could be very different. And I'm not saying that this will give you a Pareto efficient outcome, but sometimes you have to look for the second best outcome given the geopolitical considerations we have. Anyway, I'm not concerned about current account deficit as much as some of the other economists are. But sometimes you have to look for the second best outcome given the geopolitical considerations we have. Anyway, I am not concerned about current account deficit as much as some of the other economists are, primarily because of the reason that our service exports are doing exceptionally well. So our sense is that if 2.5% of GDP is that red line where we get concerned about current account deficit, then this year we are likely to have a lower than 2.5 number on current account rather than a higher than 2.5. I mean, next year, FY24.
Okay, Dr. Islam, I want to pose this question to you. The government has taken a bit of a protectionist stance on boosting trades. However, there is a clear divided house on that. Also, in my conversations with a lot of small exporters actually who have had to shut shop because it's just it things have become so unviable for them to produce that they've lost that cost competitive advantage. So is there a rethink on that policy, on that strategy? The government has been signing free trade agreements, which is a positive move. But when tariffs are increased, it somewhere undoes the work and the effort that's gone in. So is there a rethink on that?
Well, we do not believe in being protectionist. Of course, we want to have some balance, and of course, both extremes are not advisable and not something which government of the day thinks. So sometimes when you have to take such measures, you take, but it is not something which we want to showcase that we are a government who believes in protectionism rather or completely opening up our economy. But having said that, we will maintain the balance to protect our manufacturers. We will ensure that through policy measures, through whatever initiatives and budgetary allocation, we give additional PLI scheme, give support to our manufacturing space so that they can export more. Because if we want to maintain the growth, we know that part of that, large part of the GDP actually comes from the export. And well, we are a consumption-led economy, but export is playing a big role. 20% of the GDP comes from the export. So definitely there will be enough focus to ensure that that momentum continues. In last 2 years, if you can see, the kind of growth we have seen in the export segment is something phenomenal, which we were lagging for the last 10 years or 20 years. So this is a very good beginning, and government is, particularly this concerned Ministry of Commerce, is very, very focused to provide more impetus and more policy reform, more support to ensure that there is a momentum in growth in the export segment.
Sure, thank you. Okay, very quickly, just one last policy priority for the finance minister. Between inflation and growth, what should this budget go after? Professor Gowda, I'll start with you.
I'd say cut down the burden on people, cut inflation.
Cut inflation. Okay.
Yeah, growth.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Ranade. Okay, you're on mute. You're on mute, Dr. Ranade.
I think inflation affects everybody, both the rich and the poor. So therefore, inflation has to be a high priority, and you can't work at cross purposes with the monetary policy. But also not to forget the lower share, the lower part of the K. We need a much better protection for those who are vulnerable.
Okay, Aditi.
Growth.
Samiran.
No, clearly inflation, because I've already argued for fiscal consolidation, and that fiscal consolidation goes hand in hand with inflation control. We have seen in even pre-election years, controlling inflation is more important than trying to give stimulus to the economy, especially when the economy is doing reasonably well.
Okay. Dr. Islam?
See, our government's focus is always inflation. That's why MPC committee is there, and we have put it benchmark also plus minus 2% over 4%. But growth is something which we cannot ignore, because growth brings a lot of prosperity and meets the expectation and aspiration of the people of this great country.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. We could have gone on with this conversation, but I'm afraid we're out of time. Clear takeaways from this conversation are that don't expect this budget to dole out braveries. That's what I could gather from Dr. Islam's analysis and his input. Focus on capex, focus on combating inflation, and most importantly, follow the path of fiscal consolidation. These are the three, and of course, focus on people at the bottom of the pyramid. There is an unequal recovery that's happening in the economy, and we cannot turn a blind eye. So thank you very much. I hope to catch up with all of you after the budget to get a sense of how you would rate the budget. We'll be meeting soon. Thanks so much to our viewers for joining in and watching. Thank you very much.
1st of February, all eyes will be here. What Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman says on taxes, subsidies, growth, education, health, crypto, global factors and domestic recovery, every word will be crucial, every word will be analysed. But don't worry, Moneycontrol got your back. Our team will be interpreting every aspect of Budget 2023 and how it impacts your life. What's becoming more affordable? What's becoming more expensive? What are the stock recommendations and expert views? Real-time, minute-by-minute coverage. Hop on to Moneycontrol to have it all. Moneycontrol, the only digital channel to non-stop live stream budget coverage for over 12 hours. Join our experts, analysts and editors from 7:30 AM onwards on the 1st of February. Think budget, think Moneycontrol.